Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Spooky Tales for Edna. I am Sir Sinister, and I will be your guide through these spooky stories, these terrifying tales, these yelp-inducing yarns. And just like any good spooky spiel, it starts with once upon a time. The Night of the Living Cabbages. Once upon a time, there lived a girl named Ellie. She was 9, with deep blue eyes and curly brown hair. Ellie was a happy girl, although her face never showed it. Her nose was always turned upwards, like she had smelled one of Grandpa Augustus's bottom trumpets. This was probably because she had, as one of Ellie's biggest woes was that she lived on a cabbage farm. Now, living on a cabbage farm is no picnic, unless, of course, you like picnics filled with cabbage sandwiches, cabbage tea, cabbage soup, roasted cabbage, stewed cabbage, fromage de choux. And Ellie hated, more than anything in the world, the thought of cabbage. This was unfortunate, as cabbage farming had been in her family for centuries, dating all the way back to her great-great-great-great-grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Clenchbottom, who found a cabbage growing through their floorboards after buying a little cottage. This little cottage, in fact, is where Ellie is standing now, looking out the window at row upon row of disgusting, smelly, leafy green cabbages. And, to Ellie's misfortune, once her ancestors found that weaselly little cabbage, they saw it as a sign to grow more. A lot more. Now, dear listener, you may begin to feel pangs of sadness for poor Ellie, but I beg you to hold your emotions back for now, as this story gets a whole lot worse. Now, as I said before, Ellie could think of nothing more revolting than a head of leafy green cabbage. This is why every nook and cranny of her tiny cottage was stuffed to the brim of cabbage of all shapes and sizes. Every night she was served a new disgusting dish dreamed up by her cabbage-loving mum. She would sit down at the table, stuff her pockets full of it, smack her lips loudly and say, "Thanks, Mum, delicious as always." This is when she put her dastardly plan into action, hiding her mother's rancid recipes anywhere she could find. Fortunately, her Uncle Henry, who also hated the green stuff, lived only 2 minutes away. Every night, around 9 p.m., when her mother and father had fallen asleep in front of another cabbage-themed documentary, he would tap on Ellie's ground floor bedroom window and deliver a food package of the most wondrous treats. Jam tarts, bonbons, fruit pastels, extra strong mints, double fudge chocolate cake, you name it, it was there. And at the bottom, under all of these tremendous treats, was always a small packet of seeds. For you see, this was Uncle Henry's one condition. Now don't forget, once you finish your feast, you need to go out into your family's fields and scatter these seeds. "But why, Uncle? What do they do?" said Ellie, her cheeks bursting with bright blue bonbons. "Well, my dear, they will transform these disgusting cabbages into things of beauty. That way, you will never have to eat another cabbage for as long as you live." "But what will they become?" she said curiously, now slurping a strawberry-flavored smoothie. "You'll have to wait and see," he would say with a wide smile, trotting away into the darkness. This went on for a few months. Admittedly, Ellie didn't even know she had an estranged, cabbage-hating uncle until she bumped into him while taking some, as her father called them, king of all cabbages to sell at the local market. When I say bumped into, I really mean it. With a mountain of cabbages piled high in her arms, she collided with her poor uncle, sending him and a platoon of cabbages into the mud. To her surprise, instead of being outraged, he grinned widely and embraced her, paid for the cabbages that were now dripping in mud, and in Ellie's opinion, looking more edible than ever, and went on his way after furiously shaking her hand for a solid 10 minutes. A few days later, her hand still throbbing from a handshake of a lifetime, there was a tap on her window, and there he was, the first of many care packages bundled in his arms. Now, listener, I tell you this from the deepest part of my blackened heart. Don't ever trust a man who pays for damaged cabbages, and in Ellie's opinion, who pays for cabbages, full stop. And so the arrangement went on. Floorboards stopped creaking as they were now propped up by mountains of unwanted cabbage leaves. Carpets bulged, old coat pockets were stuffed, pillowcases popped, all full of disgusting cabbage. And you would think our family might notice the smell, but no. Between their tremendous cabbage-tainted toots, they did not detect the rotting leaves in the concealed hiding places of the cottage. Ellie was having the time of her life. Good food, a cabbagey secret, and her pillows had never felt so soft with all the extra padding. Until one night, after her Uncle Henry had been with the package, Ellie was out scattering the special seeds she swore she would when she heard a faint rustle behind her. She turned and, as she knew they had a rabbit problem, shrugged and went back to scattering. Then a louder rustle, closer than the one before. "Hello?" Ellie peered into the darkness. "If you're a rabbit, be my guest. Less for me to hide." She turned towards the house, her seed sowing completed, until she heard rustle, rustle, rustle. It was even closer now. She quickened her pace. Rustle, rustle, rustle. Her walk became a jog. She probably needed to burn off extra calories anyway from all this food. Rustle, rustle, rustle. She broke into a run until trip. Her foot collided with something big and round and she fell face first to the ground. Scrambling to her feet, she turned to see what she tripped on. Peering into the darkness, something rolled into view. A large, green cabbage. She glared at it, disgusted, and getting to her feet, aimed an almighty kick in its direction. To her surprise, her foot swung through the air and, as it was about to hit it, the leafy abomination rolled out of the way. She swayed but kept her balance. No, she's had too many sweets. She was still feeling dizzy. That cabbage did not just move. She began to turn when she noticed that the cabbage was smiling. Now, listener, you may be thinking, what does a smiling cabbage look like? Well, it might be the most terrifying thing you could ever lay eyes on. Even I, Sir Sinister, would not stare into the face of a grinning, gruesome cabbage. But as Ellie stood there, rooted to the spot, the cabbage's leafy features opened, and it began to sing.
Well, you must be Ellie. I've heard so much about you, I wouldn't be rooted here today without you. You see, the seeds you're sowing put brains inside my head, and cabbages won't be eaten, but we might eat you instead. 'Cause tonight is the night of the living cabbages. We'll finally stop those humans, those veggie-eating savages. We'll make them pay for all of the damages, and it's all thanks to you, Ellie, for accepting all those packages. You see? You look upset, please don't fret. Let me be crystal clear, we don't want you, you are a savior, you will be spared, my dear. You never wanted to herd a leaf upon our heads, but now it's time to turn humans into sauerkraut instead. 'Cause tonight is the night of the living cabbages. We'll use all our might before it vanishes. We'll stew up the humans, I don't care how sad it is. 'Cause tonight is the night of the living cabbages.
Ellie slammed the door behind her, locking it and dragging the old broken armchair, which was stuffed with cabbage leaves, in front of the door. This must be a dream, she thought. This can't be real. Now, dear listener, if you're easily spooked or prone to the heebie-jeebies, I would turn off now. No? Well, don't say I didn't warn you. Ellie threw herself under a sheet and screwed up her eyes, forcing herself to try and wake up from this nightmare. Then she felt the house begin to shake. She let the sheet slip from her bed and laid in horror as the walls began to bulge and buckle. Cabbage leaves from all of her well-thought-out hiding places began to slither out like snakes. Her pillowcase burst and a tornado of stems and stalks thundered out of it. Her father burst through her door. "Are you all right, my dear? What's going on?" Ellie's words were stuck in her throat, but she managed to squeeze out, "It was Uncle Henry." "Uncle Henry? You don't have an Uncle Henry!" At that moment, Ellie realized that the newly released cabbage leaves had surrounded her father and were beginning to crawl up his pajama leg. "What on earth?" he spluttered. In seconds he was engulfed, and for a second he looked like a father-shaped hedge until the leaves fell away to reveal nothing. He was gone. Ellie leapt over a horde of ravenous cabbage leaves. Where was her mother? That thought was soon answered by a blood-curdling scream from downstairs. As Ellie tripped and stumbled her way down the staircase, her small cottage was unrecognizable. It felt like she had been plunged into the deepest depths of a forest, but the undergrowth wriggled and crawled like an army of ants. She skidded as she soared over the final few steps. A humongous head of cabbage rolled through the now splintered front door, accompanied by what seemed like an infinite plague of leaves. Kicking cabbages as she went, she made her way to the kitchen. Her mother stood cornered by an army of veg. The cabbage, who had tripped Ellie earlier, was in the front, its leafy grin still fixed firmly on his face.
"The cooker of cabbage, the plunder of plant life. I will enjoy eating you most of all."
"No!" screamed Ellie, her eyes blazing with fury and fear. "Leave her alone!" The king cabbage spun in one swift movement.
"Ah, the creator. The one who made this all possible. You would like us to spare this criminal to Cabbages. Maybe celebrate her cruel life with some cabbage stew, I think not. And if you are to question my authority again, I will not hesitate to eat you too."
Then the idea struck Ellie like a bolt of lightning. Of course, she grasped the closest colossal head of cabbage and took an almighty chomp out of it.
"What are you doing?"
cried the king cabbage. "Having a midnight snack." Her mother's whimpers turned into a cry of delight as she plunged, mouse first, into a crowd of nervous-looking cabbage leaves. They ate and ate and ate. It took all night, and as the sun rose, there was only one cabbage left.
"No, we can talk about this."
With a crooked grin of her own, Ellie pounced, and a few moments later, only a single stem remained. Then silence. Then an almighty belch from her mother's direction, followed by a thunk, and Ellie's father laid sprawled on the ground, his reading glasses askew. And life went on. They never found Uncle Henry, and no one in town even recognized his description. Ellie had actually become quite fond of cabbage now and had no use for his horrible packages. Her father, on the other hand, decided to start going to the shops more often to buy a variety of food. News reporters came from all around to hear their crazy story of the man eating cabbages, but no one believed it. Watching her interview on the news that night, Ellie rolled her eyes. She's been through so much, and no one even believed her. Then, in the background of the television, she swore she saw a cabbage twitch, then roll away. Now, dear listener, the reason that cunning old Uncle Henry was never found was because he was me. Good night.